Right, everyone. It is past. We seem to be about 10 people short, but I think because we're on time, let's start in any case, and hopefully they'll rock up. Before we actually get to tonight's lecture, we've spoken a lot over the past 2 days about why the focus on women, and David gave some very interesting answers yesterday. There is one more that I think we really need to take heed of, and that is women as consumers. In 2013, the female market spent, on consumable goods, over $28 trillion US. That is 80% of the global consumer expenditure for that year. Women are a huge market, and people spend billions at marketing and advertising firms trying to target women to get you to buy certain products, to come to certain institutions, to use certain facilities, right? You represent a significant amount of money, and we want to target that. So when it comes to things like research, targeting women is also well-funded. Unfortunately, that's the way it is. David mentioned yesterday that big corporations, big money, unfortunately, it also works here. Okay. Oh. This seems to be right. Okay. Right, so on to tonight's lecture, cognitive interventions for a hazardous waste, right? And over the past 2 days, we've been hearing a lot about healthy life choices, healthy decisions, and yesterday David gave us the one big one, which was for prolonged weight loss maintenance, right? There are 2 things that you really should try to strive for, right? It's the high energy flex ideal, tons of exercise, tons of food, right? Or healthy food at least. And I mean an almost gluttonous amount. As David said yesterday, when it comes to people like bodybuilders and them, it's actually quite gross. What we also need to think about is in terms of what I spoke about on Monday, the kind of social inequalities about so many ridiculously poor households. How can you expect them to afford the thousands of rands on healthy food or organic food or unprocessed food or for gym memberships, right? Here in beautiful Cape Town, we are honestly spoiled for choice. In the middle of our city, we have a mountain, which is a national park, and we are enclosed with this beautiful coastline, and almost everywhere you look, there are mountain bike trails, running trails, these promenades that seem to sweep along the coastline. There are so many places for us to go walking, running, cycling. We are ridiculously spoiled. And as David said yesterday, his body type, he's meant to be obese. But because he exercises every day and eats like a goat, he grazes throughout the day, he is ridiculously thin. And I am jealous because of it. But David, unfortunately, represents a minority. He is the outlier amongst all of us here. I'm sorry for what I'm about to say, but I'm going to say in any case. David is single, he lives alone, his family live in the Eastern Cape, and he's a student, which means he controls his own timetable. Yesterday, instead of going to class, he was at home. He could go for a run at 3 o'clock like he told us. Unfortunately, for the rest of us who have full-time jobs and families, we don't have that kind of luxury. We work late, we work irregular hours. When we come home, we have other chores to do. We have family responsibility. We spend our entire mornings and evenings running around, fetching and carting kids to and from daycare, to and from recitals, practices. We go and we watch our kids play rugby matches and cricket and ballet and all sorts. We go to music recitals. We have basically no time to ourselves. So what happens? We ended up going for exercise at really irregular hours, late nights, early mornings, and often it's not very safe, right? In September last year, I was out for a run along the Leesburg River Trail, just down the road here, and I was mugged at knife point, right? They took my phone, my bag, everything. And that was it, done, thanks for playing, right? Particularly if you are a single woman out for an early morning run, you are a significant target, right? I cannot express to you the levels of rape and intimate partner femicide we have in this country. women are brutalized here, and that's partly because of our deeply patriarchal society. So what do? We opt to go to the gym. But as a safe alternative, they're fantastic. They're also very expensive and often very stigmatized, right? And let's be honest, for many of us, the routine of going to the gym every single day, doing 50 of these and 50 of these, and knowing today's Wednesday, it must be leg day, and being able to predict exactly what, how, when, where, and who you're going to see is exceptionally boring. Gym is intrinsically boring. And so there's become this mass market, right, where, let me just backtrack a bit. We live in a world where instant gratification is the thing to have. We want to have excitement, we want CGI, we want booms and explosions and men who are topless running across fields, saving damsels in distress. We want the excitement, right? And how do you get that at gym? Right, my dumbbell isn't going to do much for me, so right, what do? And according to a 2015 study, right, humans have a shorter attention span than goldfish thanks to smartphones. I'm not entirely sure about if it's solely due to smartphones, but a Canadian journal published proof that in 2000, the average human had an attention span of 12 seconds. It has now gone down to 8. That means that since I started, I've already lost all of you. You've shut down, you don't care, you want to go home. I have to accept that, right? So, how do we get people who are coming to the gym to stay at gym, to exercise, to want to be there? Well, we've now made a multi-billion-dollar industry around exercise equipment that is also a home media center, right? You now get treadmills and bicycle machines with TVs built in. You can plug in your iPods, you can plug in your headphones, you can subscribe to radio channels and TV channels so that while you run, you can catch up on the latest episode of Game of Thrones or Friends or whatever you want to. You want 567 Cape Talk or Fine Music Radio? You got it. We're done. Plug in, have fun. And it's not just for adults. Your kids have it too, right? A stationary kids bike that you can plug a little iPad onto, because what else does your 5-year-old want than more stimulation on an iPad, right? I remember when I was growing up, my parents couldn't wait to get me out of the house. Like, oh, you're home from school, right? Go play in the street. If we come back after dark, that's okay. Nowadays, if you don't let your kid out of your sight, there's no way you're going to play in the street. So we now have stationary bikes for kids. For me, the weirdest thing is gyms now offer you free Wi-Fi so that while you're there, you can check your emails and do your work and all sorts. What is that? That's not what we're here to actually do. But they're trying to encourage you to, if you subscribe to certain channels, we can stream live music, we can stream home movies, we can do whatever to keep you there for longer. Because the more you're there, the more likely you are to also stop off at the smoothie bar on the way out. The more likely you are to go to Kauai and have a sandwich or your coffee and all sorts, right? So it becomes a huge money-making scheme. What about those of us who don't fit the kind of gym jock ideal, who aren't the gym bunnies, as they call them, right? For those of us who are overweight or obese, there is extreme stigmatization about going to a mainstream gym. And here I've used 2 real-world examples, one from Reddit and one from Yelp. And the one is a teenage girl who took an over-the-shoulder photograph of an overweight man, and she captioned it by saying, "When a guy has bigger boobs than me," or bigger boobs than you, right? This man is at the gym. He's cognizant of his weight problem, and he's doing everything he can to lose it, to improve his life, to improve his health. And yet here is some teenage girl shaming him, not just to herself or to her friends, but on the internet. That is called cyberbullying, right? Here is a woman in Seattle, Washington, who posted on Yelp asking, right, gyms where fat people go, referring to herself as a fatty, right? She says outright, I haven't worked out in years and I look stupid when I try. I am borderline overweight right now, and at this rate, I'll probably be obese in a year. I get embarrassed when I work out around fit people. She feels embarrassment because of her body type in comparison to others. It's not necessarily that other people are looking at her, commenting, but it's how she intrinsically feels, right? And that has also opened up another money-making scheme of gyms solely dedicated towards combating or helping those who are overweight and obese. And these are meant to be safe zones, are meant to be places where you can come, and if you work out and you look like a fool, that's totally acceptable because every single person there is doing the same thing. No one stigmatizes you. And in South Africa, we have a big one called Curves. Okay. I must just point this out quickly. This is a man at a gym who was videoed and put on YouTube because he was overweight and trying to work out, and it was his first day at the gym. Okay. You can now understand why so many people refuse to go to gym, who feel embarrassed, ashamed. So how do we combat this? How do we help people who want to help themselves but are too ashamed to go out into the real world and do it? Well, luckily there are some really awesome things that are coming out in the market, or are currently out in the market. A really cool one, which David and I used to have, is a Kinect, right? Which is basically a home gaming console where at the top part you can see that there is a little sensor which uses fantastic infrared technology, and it can see you. And it can see you in absolute shocking clarity, right? This was the 360. Good, not fantastic. This was the Xbox One, right? It is so effective that it's been recorded as being able to see through certain types of clothing, right? There are pictures on the internet of people and you can see everything, it all hanging out because it's photographed them through their clothes. It is so sensitive that it can tell by looking at your skeletal structure, your proportions, your stature, your gait. It can detect exactly who you are just by looking at you. So when you go stand in front of it, it scans you and recognizes, oh, look, it's Brian, it's David, it's John, it's Patrick, Peter, Jane, whoever. It knows. And if it doesn't recognize you, it says, who are you? Sign up. I want an account. I want to know your details, your name, your email address. I want to have a blood sample. I want everything, right? The nice thing about this is, when it comes to family board games and family fun night, it's not just about sitting around the table and building a puzzle, but that families together are becoming supportive and are able to help each other play games, right? And if we're looking at things like the Kinect Sport offers a fantastic variety of things where you can do skateboarding, river rafting, basketball, volleyball, soccer, tennis, golf, you name it, it offers it. People who can't afford to go out and buy golf clubs can now play golf with their sons, with their daughters, with their wives, in the comfort of their own home. And if you look like a fool doing it, it doesn't matter. You're with family and friends, and it's all good. Anything goes. And if you're losing weight while you're doing it, that is amazing. Right? Another example, just showing you that you jump up in all sorts. The problem here is that there is besides the person, the avatar on the screen who replicates your movements, there's no actual real-time feedback, right? Which is why this is the most mind-blowing software or game you will ever find, right? The Kinect, or the Nike Kinect training program, actually superimposes you onto the screen. When you sign up, you choose your own ridiculously amazing professional personal trainer, and they give you a customized workout according to what you want. It gives you a whole lot of tests, it makes you do squats and sit-ups and all sorts, and it tells you exactly where you are, and it holds no punches. It tells you you are in bad shape. Right, and the best thing is, as you're doing it, it superimposes you on the screen. And if you're doing it well, you're blue. If you're not doing it right, once again, unashamedly, you are red. You are not doing it right. I want one hand on your hip. And eventually he becomes quite nasty, one hand on your hip. And so in that way, you're getting a fantastic home workout without leaving your actual home, right? There is no stigmatization. There's nobody taking photographs of you. There are no videos of you on YouTube. You can go to work the next day and not have to worry about are all your colleagues sniggering behind their back because they saw you doing push-ups, right? The fantastic thing about Xbox the new technology is being linked with wearable technology where it can detect your heart rate, your breathing, everything. And because it is a smart device and connected to the internet, if it detects that you are having problems and you cannot help yourself, it can call for help for you, right? It can call emergency services. That's incredible. Another popular one is the Wii Fit, which is very different. It's not about being superimposed on the screen, but it's about standing on a balance board. It's called, the Wii balance board. And this is incredible because it keeps millisecond readings of your balance, your positioning, your reaction times. And when it tells you to do tasks on the screen, like kick a virtual ball, it keeps millisecond recordings of what you're doing or what you're doing wrong. And it can give you feedback, right? It's so effective, it's now being used for physiotherapy, right? Mind-blowing stuff. And you can use this in your own home. You can go down to Cavendish, the waterfront, or wherever, and buy one of these today. Just an example that it really is a whole body workout, and depending on what games you buy around it, you can do Pilates, yoga, tennis, tons of sports, right? Here's a guy playing squash. Right. Fantastic. What is the problem here? We only seem to be combating the physical side of it, right? And even though we're all exercising, we're eating lots of healthy food, when we see sweet stuff like that, we go a little bit wild, right? When we see carbs, when we smell carbs, when we walk past Limnos Bakery, you kind of get that wild side to you. You become a little bit feral. And we relish in the excitement of, I'm having a cheat away, I shouldn't be doing this. All of a sudden, having a little block of chocolate, which would normally be I'll have one block, maybe two, becomes, I cannot live without this entire bar of chocolate. We seem to lose our inhibition. Hi there. We seem to lose our inhibition. And we kind of bring out the worst in ourselves. And as David pointed out yesterday, with every weight relapse, right, every time we fall off the bandwagon and we devour the entire turkey with the milkshake and the donut because we just can't live without it, it becomes exceptionally harder and harder and harder every time to return to our ideal healthy weight. Right? And the bottom line, the thing I'm trying to get across here is we're only confronting half the problem. As David's entire lecture yesterday pointed out, there is a deep neurophysiological aspect that's taking place subconsciously that we need to really tap into. Certain people are programmed in certain ways to think about food and react to food differently. They have a heightened visual food cue reactivity. Right? And these are subconscious mechanisms that impact effective weight loss maintenance. And I'm returning back to something that I put up on day one, that's this intersection of food and the visual, right? And here I'm going to delve into a bit of the airy-fairy social sciences, and please just bear with me here, right? In 1980, a fantastic French theorist called Roland Barthes wrote an ode to his dead mother, right, called Camera Lucida. And in it, he pined over this photograph of his mother, writing about what he saw and how he felt. And this book became a foundational text of what we now call visual theory, right? And in there, he proposed two very important points, that everything you ever see, right, is one of two things, the studium or the punctum. The studium is everything you see. It squats upon the studium of your mind. It's almost like a grandstand. Something about it interests you. You look at it. It's the colors, it's the pose, it's the different textures. It's something you've never seen before. But you look at it and you move on. But the punctum, right, that which punctures, it's that which, on some level, deep inside of you, you cannot escape from, that brings you back to the photograph or back to the image again and again and again. And it's been theorized that to explore that, to write about that, to tell somebody else about the punctum to you, is to almost out yourself, to reveal something deep intrinsic to you. Right? And here are two fantastic photographs that, for me, squat upon the studium of my mind. I'm drawn in by the color, the textures, the light, the interesting posing, right? The trauma of it. But there's one part of this that is the punctum for me, and that is This is a photograph taken in 2015 by Sanela Moholi, who is also the subject. And in this photograph, she has digitally manipulated her eyes. She has whitened them out. She's blacked out the sclera, whitened out the sclera, and her pupil and iris have become darkened. It is a deeply painful act. It feels filled with hurt and anger that if the eyes are the window to your soul, she's had to remove them because you don't see it in any case, so why must they be there? She, as a counter-heteronormative subject, is seen as a reject, a deviant, an outcast. If she has no soul, why must she have eyes? Right? That is the punctum to me. And David's research, interestingly, demonstrates that viewing images can have a highly powerful and subjective neurophysiological response. He has proof that the punctum can be quantified and measured, particularly in terms of calorie-dense, highly palatable, processed food. So, at this point, I want to take a little bit of a fun detour, and I want to have an experiment, and I want us to just try something. I've done a bit of a bastardization of David's PhD EEG work, and I'm going to expose you to a Stroop task, a modified Stroop task. Let me just explain what that is quickly. So, John Ridley Stroop was an American psychologist living in Tennessee, and he looked at condition and cognitive interference, by which I mean how do brains handle and process conflict resolution and its impact on reaction time. And specifically, he developed a task, which I'm sure many of you have seen before, right? Where you have different words representing colors, right? So we have red, blue, green, and yellow. But he's put them in he's written them in different colors. So the top one is green, then yellow, red, and where it is in gray, when you read it, you actually read the word, so yellow. And when people do that, we see that there's a lot going on cognitively. They are trying to process the color, the word, they're fighting distraction, right? So there's a lot going on. And David's research, and what made it so interesting was that he modified the Stroop task to include photographs of office furniture, highly palatable food, lots of different things. And recently they've published a standardized food image database, right? First ever in the world, where all images have been standardized for color, chroma, size, contrast, purity, whatever, so that you are not affected by the image, but anything except what it is an actual image of. Okay. So, at this point, I want you to imagine in your mind you're putting on that cap that David told us about with all the electrodes, right? We're putting it on, and David's injecting this really horrible smelling gel into our hair because it helps with the conductivity of the electricity, right? And I want to, is it this one? No, it's not. Right, that one. Is there another one I need to push? No. Okay, that's why it's dark, is we're going to get it in here. But I want you to imagine that you're in a pitch black room, right? It's so dark because we're trying to give you sensory deprivation, so it is just you and the words on the screen, right? So before we begin, I want you to just help me here. Let's start at the top and say the color the word is written in, unless it's written in green, in which case you read the word aloud, right? Let's start at the top. Red. Blue. Ah, no, we're not. Oh, actually, no, we're not. When it's in gray, we're not saying the word gray. We're going to read what it says. Okay, so we're going to say green. Okay, and the last one, yellow. Okay, perfect. And when you see an image like that, just bask in its elegance and beauty. Okay, you don't need to say anything. Just enjoy it. Okay, are we ready? Okay, so when you see the word pop up, please out loud say the color it's in, just like we did before. And there are no wrong answers here. Ask David. I got mine completely wrong and all messed up, and hey, I'm a size 28, so we're good. So, let's start. Yellow. Okay. It does take its time, just bear with it. Ah, yellow. When it's in gray, we read the word. Red. Great. Congratulations, you've just done your first ever Stroop task for most of you. Now, once you've done that, on David's monitor, he has an absolute mush, something like that, depending on where the electrodes are placed. So your occipital lobe, your parietal lobe, whatever. And yesterday, David showed us a very interesting result from your parietal lobe, which is going to be from these two over here. All right? Which I'll actually demonstrate after the next one. Okay, you ready for the next one? Great. Remember, if it's written in a color, say the color that the word is written in, don't read it. If the word is written in gray, read the word out loud. Okay. Fantastic. Let's go. I hear that. Okay, fantastic. And I'm sure you can see that already you guys are having a very, very visceral response to the food as compared to the office furniture, right? And I'm sure it's not just because it's late and you'll want to get to going for dinner, but David's results, interestingly, and this is just a copy of his slide from yesterday, that from the parietal cortex from his study cohort, right, overweight and obese women showed greater attentional processing of processed foods, and processing speeds are faster, which basically means during the Stroop task where there is food, their brains shift a gear. They go up into some sort of fantastic, superhuman, awesome mode. They become alert. Their attention is skyrocketed. It's fantastic. Something is really interesting is going on. And I hear you all say, but Brian, that's fantastic, but what does that actually mean for us on the actual ground? What's actually going on here? Okay, and this is the really cool bit. This is what David and I were doing towards the end of last year, right? So we started to explore, how do we put this knowledge into an everyday practice? How do we make sure that everyday people on the ground can have their brains cognitively, I don't want to say reprogrammed, but go through a kind of therapy to help process their attention away from food, right? So we looked at things like mobile apps, and we are aware that what I'm about to show you, it's very smartphone orientated, but 90% of all South Africans access the internet, and they do that through things like Mixit, WhatsApp, Mig33, right? So there are interesting ways that we can access and communicate with lower income households. So we understand that. What I'm about to show you is just a demonstration or a brief intro to what's going on, or what we would like to do. There is a patent in the works down here, but I can't tell you about that. If I do, I'd have to kill you. So let's rather not do that. So I want you to imagine that this is on your phone screen, or on your tablet, on your iPad, whatever. And you get these images, and we say to you, right, I want you to select all of the flowers, right? And so you go selecting the flowers. And while you're doing that, we are measuring your reaction time, your accuracy, right, a whole lot of things. So you go and you find that there are 4 flowers, and we do it again with, this time, utensils, this time select the food, do whatever, right? And then a kind of speed trial, right? Choose the kitchen utensil, or the kitchen appliance. It's that one. The kitchen appliance, that one. And every time we are measuring your reaction time, we're measuring how accurately you do this. Is there a lapse? Is there not? If there is a lapse, what kind of food have you been exposed to that makes you go, oh, that's interesting? And if there are millisecond delays, that gives us a lot of information about you. And what we're hoping is that we can have a self-updating database that will sensitize itself, and we can give you feedback on a regular basis to tell you you're improving, you're not. What about this? Have you tried that? All right? Something else that we started to delve into, and this is purely theoretical at this point, is virtual reality. And the nice thing about this is you can make people do physical activities, right? Exercise using special equipment in a completely different environment, You can make them do physical activities and cognitive tasks simultaneously, right? And some of the technology is really, really cool. You can demonstrate flying and all sorts, which in this case will activate core muscles and all sorts. Some really cool stuff happening. So if we're going to use virtual reality for a kind of cognitive remediation, what would that look like? And here are some rather crude examples. I want you to imagine that you are wearing the Oculus Rift, right? You're in this 3D virtual maze, and we say to you, right, you have to go from this entrance and get out the other entrance in the quickest possible time. But we're cruel and vindictive, so what do? We put food all over the place, and we see how you do, right? If you do it slower with the food, interesting stuff's going on. If you do it faster, right, something else even more interesting. And then long-term goals. And this is a vindictive little thing of mine. Let's say we put you into a shopping or into a supermarket, right, laden with food, all the food you could ever possibly imagine. And we say to you, right, in this supermarket, with this layout, there is a bomb. I want you to defuse that bomb before it goes off. Right, here we have both a physical task and a cognitive task to see how people do. Depending on how they do that, right, we can help or we can't. There's lots going on. Before I say goodbye, I want you to just point out 3 interesting things about the way supermarkets are laid out, right? And you can put these into practice when you go home today, right? We all shop in a clockwise direction, and supermarkets often put the really cheap, nasty stuff first, with the good, healthy, more expensive items at the far side. We recommend that you start shopping anti-clockwise. Get to the good stuff that you need first. By doing so, if you filled your basket up with healthy food, you are less likely to buy the nonsense. Secondly, the layout. If we can just go back to that one, right? Very, very often, your staple diets, right, your essential food nutrients are all along the periphery, with the luxury items in the middle that you have to spend your time walking up and down the aisles. You are forced to walk past. It's why they put all these sweets at the aisle when you go to pay. You are forced to stand and look at it. And as we saw with the photograph on Monday, you can't help but fall in love with those hypnotically bright colors and your gummy bears that call your name, beckon you forth, eat me, eat me. So we buy. And the aisles at the till are all really low because your kids are there. And your kids are at that height. And how can you say no to the daddy, I love you, please, if you really love me, you'll buy me these 10 packets of chips. Okay, sure. All right. Oh. And lastly, when you go and you buy cereal or you go and you buy any product and there are multiple options, right, different brands, look at the item on the right. We read from left to right, and often they put the most expensive, the sexier brand on the left. Often it's not the one that's good for you. It's the one they want you to buy, and human nature says, I'm going to grab that first because it's the one I saw first. Start thinking about the way you choose your food differently. Look at the ones on the right. And that's it. Thank you very, very much. I'm going to hand over to David now. And we'll keep all the questions for the end. So we'll just do all that in one go. So I'm sure David will answer lots of them with the more biological side. Thank you very much, everyone.
Good. Okay, can everybody hear me? Is that loud and clear? No interference? Okay, let me just get plugged in and then we can get going. Okay. Okay, good. Right, so good evening, everybody. So tonight, as I'm sure you've picked up by now, is all about solutions, right? And solutions in terms of what we need to achieve as a collective and as individuals in order to surmount the major epidemic that obesity has become today. So Brian has already spoken to you about the various things that we might look at from social, cultural, economic, and even political perspectives. But what I'm going to try and bring to the table tonight is what we can do from a biological and a neuroscientific perspective. Now, I've made notes for tonight's talk because I had a feeling that Brian would be using a lot of the time tonight, because I know he's quite passionate about the cognitive intervention part of what we do together. I want to also reserve some time at the end for some discussion, because we haven't really had some time for discourse amongst ourselves as a class yet. But if you're too shy, once again, please come to me afterwards and feel free to ask questions. So in today's wrap-up session, I would like to contribute where I can to creating a road in your minds which bypass all the convoluted and confusing pieces of information and advice that you come across regarding obesity and weight loss, and to build somewhat of a direct highway between everybody in this room and the maintenance of a biological state which is free of obesity or obesity-related ailments and illnesses. I really want to try my best to strike a balance between summarizing what we need to do as a human race in order to overcome the obesity epidemic. But I also want to stress what we can do as individuals to protect ourselves whilst the environment is still something which is toxic and encourages our bodies and our minds to become unhealthy. So in other words, I want all of you to walk away with broader knowledge, but also with practical tips, which you might implement to protect yourselves and the people that you love, whilst we still have to clean up our periphery. Now, I'm sure that we've all heard this before. All you need to do to lose weight is to exercise more and to eat less. And as I've shown you yesterday, it really isn't that simple. We spoke about energy flux, and we spoke about energy balance. And I really hope that everybody understands the difference between those two concepts now. And if you don't, then I really have failed at communicating the most important message which I have tried to communicate. So we've already discussed the intricacies of obesity from a sociocultural perspective, and furthermore, we have learned that our bodies undergo measurable and quantifiable changes in terms of our physiology, our behavior, and our brain activity, which maintain that obese state. Is that all ringing a bell from yesterday's talk? I hope. Okay. So Brian has already gone through this, but I just want to show of hands. Who is looking at or noticed the cupcakes first? Right? Okay. So, well, as I already explained yesterday, we can get physiologically and emotionally hungry just by seeing or looking at food. And getting hungry when food wasn't available used to be an evolutionary asset, right? That makes sense. But now that we have food in excess, our evolutionary assets might be the very things that are killing us today. So when we look back in time, it's clear that our biology has remained more or less the same, right? We haven't changed much as a species. But in contrast, our environment and how we interact with our environment has changed drastically. Our biggest concern should be the sheer availability and the accessibility of food, and moreover, the quality of the foods and how we interact with these foods. I want us to look at the results of a study which perfectly demonstrate how we as humans have a limited cognitive capacity and are predisposed to making bad decisions sometimes. We can't always make good decisions, and sometimes we falter. More often than not, we falter. So scientists randomly assigned individuals to one of two groups. In group one, the individuals were told to memorize a 2-digit number. In the second group, the participants were asked to memorize a 7-digit number. After a few hours, both groups were given the option to consume either a healthy or a low-calorie meal, or a meal that wasn't processed, like the fruit salad over here. It actually was a fruit salad in an actual study. Or to consume processed foods. I think here they were provided with donuts and savory treats and cakes and things. So the interesting thing is that the results show that the vast majority of the people in group one chose to go for the fruit salad, whereas virtually all of the people in the second group went for the treats. Now, at certain points in our evolution, the strongest stresses we were subjected to were A, running away from a hungry predator that was chasing us down, or B, when food was scarce or even sometimes completely absent. These stress responses are so potent and so ingrained in our physiology and in our neural circuitries in our brains that they are still measurable today. And they really program us to overeat and to replenish fat stores in preparation for the next bout of famine. So knowing this, scientists have turned to the brain as a medium of intervention for the treatment of obesity. Note on this picture how the brain can be seen as a three-story house: the orange, the yellow, and the blue. The ground floor is known as the reptilian brain. This part of the brain modulates our instinctual behaviors. One level up, we find the midbrain. This houses our emotive responses, our emotions, our feelings. And right at the top, the new brain. This is the part of the brain that is closest to our scalp surface and the part of the brain that we actually measure most of the time when we do EEG research or functional research with fMRI. This part of the brain is responsible for rational thought and executive processes. The parts of the brain that we spoke about yesterday with relating to inhibition and motivation and control behavior. It is no wonder then that scientists have started to work on the new brain first, using executive function or higher mental function as a possible avenue to override and to cancel out food-seeking behavior which emanates from the lower parts of the brain. So the problem with this approach is, however, that it takes immense amounts of cognitive effort and energy to use our executive processes to override our emotions and our instincts. So the real solution then is to figure out how to trigger the ground floor first, right? The bottom floor, the orange floor, or most importantly, actually, the middle brain, where our emotional processes happen. And these are the parts of the brain that really attribute how much value we give to food and how much saliency food has to us. Interestingly, nobody has figured out how to do this yet, and the general feeling amongst obesity researchers and researchers that look at diabetes is that the person who discovers this will be a sure Nobel Prize winner. So maybe peace as well. So that's a definite thing. So if you're an obesity researcher, if you're working on the brain, you're quite lucky and you're a good contestant for that prize. But what I do want to stress is that it is really sad that we have to down-regulate and almost kind of break down our evolutionary wiring, the things that used to keep us alive, to prevent us from dying today. So we've already spoken about this, but while modulating brain activity is one way of treating the problem, we also have to come up with ways of creating a safer food environment. Food outlets need to stop putting us at risk by taking advantage of our instinctive and emotional parts of our brains. The impulse aisle, as I like to call it, as you approach the till, is the perfect example, as Brian mentioned, of how environments have been created to encourage excessive food consumption. And by now, I am sure that most of you understand that the desire to grab one of these impulse items is much more complex than mere willful, conscious control. So we essentially have to ignore several innate and inborn evolutionary signals so as to give these items a skip. Store layouts need to change, for sure. Something that I think we can all relate to, I think, is the problematic way that we have been financially encouraged to eat certain foods. So if you think about restaurants, for example, this picture on the left-hand side is what we would commonly be served, whereas the picture on the right-hand side is what actually constitutes one sample or one portion of food. So once again, this is the same principle that we were speaking about earlier, about manipulating our evolutionary wiring, manipulating the emotive parts of our brain to overeat. Our brains are so primed to respond to food that if something is presented to you, you will most likely eat it. You probably won't stop. So something that I think we can all relate to is the problematic way, like I said earlier, about money and finance. Brian spoke about kids and having families. And I want to pose the question, which I'm sure most of you want to know, is why are processed foods particularly so cheap? Why are they why is it so cost effective to go on a processed food diet? So In part, they're cheap because our government subsidizes the producers of corn and wheat, which are the main ingredients in processed and preserved snacks, which keeps crop prices low. In addition, lean meats and fish and fruits and veggies, they're easily perishable. And there's a bit of a cost involved in delivering them unsullied to our table or to our cafeteria tray. But the fast food burger does not necessarily need to be less expensive than the garden salad. Fresh, wholesome foods are not intrinsically more expensive to produce, but underlying the most of the food price disparity in South Africa is the fact that we as consumers have voted with our forks and told our government and food suppliers that we want cheap, we want convenient, we want processed, we want good tasting junk. So our government therefore subsidizes these crops and these farmers, and these are the things that farmers sell. It's that simple, really. So I touched briefly on this yesterday, and I think we can also all appreciate that real food and good food is exceptionally difficult to find in an overly processed world, right? We spoke yesterday about if you remove all of the sugary and processed foods from your local grocer, you'll end up with about 20% of the items left in front of you, which is a scary statistic. Perhaps the most important step that we all need to take is to consider what we call real food, because real food doesn't come in a wrapper, like I mentioned. Real food doesn't come with an ingredients list. Real food doesn't have to mask itself with labels such as all natural, fat-free, or healthy. Real food is grown, it's cared for, and it requires that we know how to prepare it. Real food takes time. And I'm afraid to say it, but we're already living in an era where the only way to truly know what's in your food is to grow your food yourself. So your everyday meal, when deconstructed, should look something like this. I don't see any refined products, sauces, or superfluous additives, do you? I also mentioned this yesterday, but we can use the farm-to-table rule. Think about the production process of all of the foods that you consume. If your food is more than 2 steps removed from its natural state, it's probably bad for you. If your food has been reshaped or reworked, and if it required added sauces to make it more palatable, it's likely something that is not good for you. You should not be eating that. I'm pretty certain that one would not find free-range chicken nuggets roaming the coops of any farm. So speaking of healthy foods, let's say you're hungry and you decide to eat a balanced meal. You do, and dopamine, like we spoke about yesterday, dopamine, the neurotransmitter responsible for the level of pleasure we derive from food, it spikes, and your natural reward centers are activated appropriately. But if you eat the same dish several days in a row, dopamine levels will eventually spike less and less and level out. That's because our brains, and what we naturally want to consume, pay special attention to new tastes and new foods, and that's for 2 reasons. The first reason is because our brains are primed to avoid food that's gone off. Spoiled food is avoided at all costs. The second reason is because the more variety we eat, the more likely we are to get all of the nutrients that our bodies need. Therefore, eating an array of foods, or as most dietitians would say, I think there are a few in the audience, I did speak to a few before, and I'm sure you probably all say this to your patients, but eat the rainbow, eat all of the colors of the rainbow, because that wards off reward-driven eating. Your pleasure response remains in check because you're getting a great variety of food. So we have also yesterday we touched upon how sugar influences mental functioning and mental health. It just so happens that our brains are happiest and function optimally when our blood glucose levels or our blood sugar levels are stable, so hovering around where the blue dotted line is over here. So looking at sugary meals and processed meals, the purple line, the solid purple line, blood sugar spikes and drastically plummets when you eat a meal like this. And with it, drastic dips activates the stress hormones called cortisol and adrenaline, or epinephrine. These stress hormones then trigger our cravings because, once again, food equals safety, food equals being okay from an evolutionary perspective. And surprise, the chronic overactivation and overuse of our stress response system also has devastating effects on our bodies. To name but a few, chronic stress activates inflammatory processes within the brain tissue itself. It creates free radicals that kill brain cells and also depletes critical brain chemicals that protect us from depression. We spoke about this as well yesterday, heart rate variability, because we understand that heart health goes hand in hand with brain health. But to revisit this as the take-home message of that part of the lecture yesterday, people with a higher degree of heart rate variability are considered healthier and less likely to die from cardiovascular disease or from disease of all causes. So at first, this might sound somewhat counterintuitive. I know some of you struggled with that yesterday, especially if you're not familiar with cardiology and how the heart works. But think about the heart as a dynamic system which is supposed to respond to external cues. It's supposed to be a flexible, pliable system. We spoke about this yesterday. So since our hearts are regulated by our brains to some degree and by stress response systems, it is no wonder then that cardiac health deteriorates very drastically with increased processed food consumption. These are just a few but very profound ways in which we have discovered that sugar is bad for us and processed foods particularly are bad for us, and that we need to change the way that we eat. But over and above what we do on an individual level, the government and food industry needs to come to the table together with scientists and with healthcare providers. And we need to change the way that food is produced. If it's produced correctly, we'll eat correctly, and obesity rates will naturally start to decrease. Did you know that you make approximately 200 food-related choices every day? 200. Think about billboards, think about things on cars, driving past, advertisements on TV. With that many decisions, it's nearly impossible to have them all be weight loss friendly decisions, right? All of them, 200 decisions out of 200 decisions can't possibly be healthy decisions every single day of your life. At this point, I would like to refer to another study, which I think is very important. This study analyzed the results of 3 previous studies. So it was a meta-analysis that examined a total of 542 participants' results. The participants answered simple questions about diet strategies and weight loss success. And researchers also asked the participants to develop rules that other people might follow should they want to become healthier and should they want to lose weight. So the majority of dieters made rules based on deprivation. And we spoke about deprivation yesterday and why that's also not the way to go, such as eliminating favorite foods. And people with low levels of self-control were even more likely to recommend deprivation-based dieting strategies. And the study's authors suggest that people who already struggle with self-control might set themselves up for failure by embracing deprivation rather than by focusing on healthy eating. So what I'm trying to say, to make it simpler, is that self-control is finite. Rather than treating yourself like a robot, it's a better idea to come up with ways of re-engineering your own food. If you love pizza and can't go without pizza for a week, make your own pizza every night, and at least this way you can know what's in it, and you can add as many real foods to that as possible. Lastly, I hope that I explained adequately why it is much more effective to achieve energy balance here as opposed to here. Eating more whilst burning more calories protects us metabolically from going into survival mode, as we saw yesterday. And resting metabolism remains high and functional, and so do all of the other natural processes which maintain a healthy energy system. A system which is stimulated by a flux of energy in and a flux of energy out. Not surprisingly, the implementation of all of these ideas, those from Brian's talks and those from my talks, have the potential of reducing 44% of diabetes cases, 23% of heart disease cases, and 41% of cancer cases. And of course, education is always key. We as parents, as brothers and sisters of younger kids, need to make sure that our kids do not make the same mistakes that we did and our previous generations did. And to end, I would like to leave you all with this quote, a statement from self-proclaimed rebel registered dietitian Dana McDonald. She says, "Ignore healthy claims on packaged foods. There is no such thing as healthy, ultra-processed foods." Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining Brian and me on this journey through the social and the biological sciences. We sincerely hope that you are walking away with newfound knowledge and the power to live longer, healthier, and happier lives. Your attendance has been most appreciated. Thank you. I am dying for questions. Yes. Okay, so the question was about intermittent fasting. So I have heard of this before, when doctors and dietitians recommend that patients stop eating for 2 days, then eat normally, and then it's a cycle that goes on like that, more or less. So I haven't personally come across any scientific research on that, but I think that's specific to certain kinds of illnesses and certain kinds of especially if you're dealing with metabolic illness, that can be helpful. I know, for example, those kinds of out there strategies are, especially in cancer, I know that surprisingly processed foods are used on cancer patients because then you don't have probiotics entering a cancer patient's system, which tends to upregulate certain kinds of cancers. So it probably relates to a certain kind of illness, a certain kind of disorder.
I think she's predisposed to diabetes.
Okay, perfect. It probably relates to insulin sensitivity, because if you do fast, it does increase the level of sensitivity your cells have to unlocking and allowing glucose in. But once again, I don't think that's a sustainable strategy. It sounds like maybe she was in a bit of an upflaring of being sick or something. Okay, any other questions for either Brian or myself? Yes.
Sort of people were in there? High income, low income? Was it just an across the board?
So the World Health Organization statistic. So the question was, how was the 40% obesity level in South Africa and in other countries? So that was how was that statistic arrived at. So those are normally done with simple questionnaires, and they're also done with researchers who do epidemiology studies. So they go out and they actually do the physical measures on people. So obviously you can't go out and measure every single person, so you get a sample of people from every community. And that paper was actually published in The Lancet in 2014 or 2015, and I think they did about 54 countries worldwide. So there are researchers that actually go out and test hundreds and hundreds of people in different communities. So it wasn't just like a questionnaire, it was actually physically measured people.
They're not targeting certain people.
No.
Every 10th person they pass on the pavement or something. Right?
Yeah, so it's randomly measured people, but it is across socioeconomic bands and different communities. But you can obviously deconstruct that, and that paper does break it down. If you want to look correct for age, correct for sex, correct for income, you can correct all of those things. Okay.
On that note, I think the World Health Organization website has an absolute wealth of material. If you ever have any questions after this, go ahead and have a scroll. There is some fantastic stuff there, and it's not just on obesity, it is everything from different diseases to access to information, you name it, they've got it, and they really are a leading authority in the field. Gee, it's a resource I recommend you pillage on a regular basis.
Did everybody hear that? Yes. Okay. More questions? Yes.
Have you interviewed groups of South African black women? Yeah.
So,
And do they not feel self-conscious about
okay.
their shapes?
Yes. Okay, so the question is discrepancies between black women and white women and how feelings about body shape are different. So there's she's an amazing researcher. Her name is Dr. Julia Goedeke. She actually does diabetes research, and she's based at UCT Sports Medicine Unit. And she actually looks at body image across cultures in South Africa. And I'm sure most of us are aware that in black African communities, bigger is seen to be beautiful. Bigger is seen to be disease-free. You don't have HIV. You don't have AIDS. You're more affluent. You can afford more food. So there is a discrepancy between which kinds of body shapes we do value. But the problem is that the mechanisms which perpetuate obesity in different groups, and it's not related.
Right, everyone. It is past. We seem to be about 10 people short, but I think because we're on time, let's start in any case, and hopefully they'll rock up. Before we actually get to tonight's lecture, we've spoken a lot over the past 2 days about why the focus on women? And David gave some very interesting answers yesterday. There is one more that I think we really need to take heed of, and that is women as consumers. In 2013, the female market spent, on consumable goods over 28 trillion US dollars. That is 80% of the global consumer expenditure for that year. Women are a huge market, and people spend billions at marketing and advertising firms trying to target women to get you to buy certain products, to come to certain institutions, to use certain facilities, right? You represent a significant amount of money, and we want to target that. So when it comes to things like research, targeting women is also well funded. Unfortunately, that's the way it is. David mentioned yesterday that big corporations, big money, unfortunately, it also works here. Okay. Oh. This seems to be, right? Okay. Right, so on to tonight's lecture, cognitive interventions for a hazardous waste, right? And over the past 2 days, we've been hearing a lot about healthy life choices, healthy decisions, and yesterday David gave us the one big one, which was for prolonged weight loss maintenance, right? There are two things that you really should try to strive for, right? It's the high energy flex ideal, tons of exercise, tons of food, right? Or healthy food at least. And I mean an almost gluttonous amount. As David said yesterday, when it comes to people like bodybuilders and them, it's actually quite gross. What we also need to think about is in terms of what he lives alone, his family live in the Eastern Cape, and he's a student, which means he controls his own timetable. Yesterday, instead of going to class, he was at home. He could go for a run at 3 o'clock like he told us. Unfortunately, for the rest of us who have full-time jobs and families, we don't have that kind of luxury. We work late, we work irregular hours. When we come home, we have other chores to do. We have family responsibility. We spend our entire mornings and evenings running around, fetching and carting kids to and from daycare, to and from recitals, practices. We go and we watch our kids play rugby matches and cricket and ballet and all sorts. We go to music recitals. We have basically no time to ourselves. So what happens? We ended up going for exercise at really irregular hours, late nights, early mornings, and often it's not very safe, right? In September last year, I was out for a run along the Leesburg River Trail, just down the road here, and I was mugged at knife point, right? They took my phone, my bag, everything. And that was it, done, thanks for playing, right? Particularly if you are a single woman out for an early morning run, you are a significant target, right? I cannot express to you the levels of rape and intimate partner femicide we have in this country. Women are brutalized here, and that's partly because of our deeply patriarchal society. So what do? We opt to go to gym. But as a safe alternative, they're fantastic. They're also very expensive and often very stigmatized, right? And let's be honest, for many of us, the routine of going to gym every single day, doing 50 of these and 50 of these, and knowing today's Wednesday, it must be leg day, and being able to predict exactly what, how, when, where, and who you're going to see is exceptionally boring. Gym is intrinsically boring. And so there's become this mass market, right, where, let me just backtrack a bit. We live in a world where instant gratification is the thing to have. We want to have excitement, we want CGI, we want booms and explosions and men who are topless running across fields, saving dead. I spoke about on Monday, the kind of social inequalities about so many ridiculously poor households. How can you expect them to afford the thousands of rands on healthy food or organic food or unprocessed food or for gym memberships, right? Here in beautiful Cape Town, we are honestly spoiled for choice. In the middle of our city, we have a mountain, which is a national park, and we are enclosed with this beautiful coastline, and almost everywhere you look, there are mountain bike trails, running trails, these promenades that seem to sweep along the coastline. There are so many places for us to go, walking, running, cycling. We are ridiculously spoiled. And as David said yesterday, his body type, he's meant to be obese. But because he exercises every day and eats like a goat, he grazes throughout the day, he is ridiculously thin. And I am jealous because of it. But David, unfortunately, represents a minority. He is the outlier amongst all of us here. I'm sorry for what I'm about to say, but I'm going to say it in any case. David is, he is single,